Good morning. We are reading The Wheel on the School by Maynard de Jong, pictures by Maurice Sendak. We are in the chapter called The Wheel on the School. And the children have not had any luck getting their fathers to come to put the wheel up, so they are at the school, pretty disheartened. Finally, Yella turned on Dirk and Pierre as authors of the scheme. "Well," he demanded, "is your dad coming?" Pierre and Dirk looked at each other. "No," Pierre admitted slowly, "I guess not." That cleared the air. "Mine isn't either. You should have heard him." "Neither is mine. He isn't coming at all. Said he'd just as soon try to sail the sea in a bushel basket in this storm as sit on the sharp roof of a school. Now maybe, he said, if we had a saddle he might try it. But what good was a fisherman split in two on the ridge of a sharp roof in the high wind? The two halves of him he didn't think could go out fishing afterwards and catch double the amount of fish." In spite of themselves, they all laughed at the sally. Now that they'd all admitted failure, they tried to outdo each other in repeating what their fathers had said. Now they could laugh about it. And Elke didn't say, "What did I tell you?" He was laughing too hard. Yella summed it up for all of them. "Guess it is too windy for old men like our dads." The teacher suddenly stood in the doorway. Lena burst out with it for the whole group. "None of our dads, not a single one would come," she said. "Not a one would get from behind the stove. There they sit, baking." "So," the teacher said, "so is that a grievance?" "Wise men, I'd say. You'll have to learn that too, sooner or later, that you can't defy a storm, that you can't hurt a wall with just your head. So let's go inside. Let's start right in on our lessons to get our minds on other things. Your fathers will come through. You know that. If not today, the first possible day that the storm will let them. They'll put the wheel up before they set out to sea again." "Did they tell you that?" Lena asked eagerly. "No, they didn't tell me. I know that. And all of you ought to know it, too. Fathers always come through when it's possible. It's the way of fathers and mothers. You're just impatient, but the wheel can wait now. The storks will be waiting out the storm. Let's be just as patient and wise as the storks." The lessons didn't go too well in spite of the teacher's reassurances. The wind, howling and shrieking around the corners of the exposed school, kept reminding them of the storm sweeping across the sea and the land. The wagon wheel, leaning against the blackboard, kept reminding them of storks. The howl of the wind made it difficult to understand the teacher and made it even more difficult to concentrate on answers. Who could think out arithmetic problems when hundreds of storks coming from Africa were maybe going down in the sea? How many storks would drown and never come to shore? That was the outrageous arithmetic problem the wind seemed to be howling at them. The teacher asked Elke how much 16 times 16 were. Elke had to jerk his attention away from the window where a tuft of hay was held against the glass by the relentless wind. "There won't be a single stork come through a storm like this," Elke answered. Nobody smiled at Elke's mistake. All eyes went anxiously to the window and from the window to the huge wagon wheel leaning against the front blackboard. Even the teacher looked somber. "It's getting still worse," somebody in the back seat muttered. "It only seems that way," the teacher said slowly, "because we feel so helpless, because we're just sitting still and doing nothing about the wheel. Inaction is hard, and still, Elke, the only problem before us that we can do anything about, how much are 16 times 16? There was a long pause. Elke had to jerk his mind from his own little woes and then figure out the answer. He got it wrong. "Oh," he said moodily to himself, "I thought he said 16 times 18. Nobody but Elke cared that his answer was wrong, not even the teacher. The teacher himself was standing, listening to the sounds outside. The wind seemed to be making new noises. Muttering, grumbling noises penetrated the classroom door. Outside the portal there was a sound as of something crashing down. Now there were stumbling noises in the portal. The wind must have blown something in and was rolling it around. Everybody's head was cocked toward the classroom door. There came a hard knock. There were voices. Our dads! Lena cried. The teacher hurried to open the door. There stood the men of Shora. It is insane. It's insane, one of the men said to the teacher. It sounded like Elka's father. First, the kids nag you every waking minute, so you chase the kids off to school. What happens then? Their mothers start in on you. Nobody's got anything on the brain but those blasted storks on that wagon wheel. Well, they nagged us all out of our houses, so we got together and decided it was less grief putting up that wheel and facing a bunch of nagging women and children. The teacher grinned at the men. Solomon found that out a few thousand years before you. Didn't he in his Proverbs say that it was better to sit on the roof of a house than with a nagging woman inside the house? Alka's father turned to the men behind him. Did you hear that? If his wives had even wise old Solomon up on a roof, what are a few dumb fishermen going to do? Get on the roof with Solomon, somebody said in a portal. He knew when he was licked. The schoolroom tittered. The men were joking, and in spite of the storm, they were trying to put the wheel up. And they weren't happy. They weren't unhappy about it. You could tell that. Not if they were making wisecracks. That was always a good sign. Yella's hefty father peered over the head of the teacher into the classroom. It seems I was told, he boomed, that part of the deal was that if we put that wheel on the school, there'd be no school today. Was I correctly informed, or was that just Yella and his endless love for school? No! The whole room sang out. No school! He promised! They did not wait for the teacher so much as to nod his head. They could see it in his face. Anything went today. They streamed from the room and got into jackets and stocking caps and wooden shoes. From the portal they saw that their fathers had even brought ladders and lumber and ropes. The stuff lay in a helter-skelter pile in the schoolyard where it had been dropped. Out of the way! Out of the way, all you mortals! Yella came shouting. Yella alone had remembered. He had jumped to the front of the room to get the wagon wheel instead of just rushing out with the rest. Now he sent the wheel rolling wildly into the portal. Everybody had to scatter. The wheel wobbled in an uncertain path, somehow found the outside doorway, plunged into the yard, and settled itself on the pile of beams and ropes and ladders. Well, it's all here now, a man shouted. Now roll out your storks. The men laughed, but not the children. Happy and relieved and eager as they were, now that their fathers were actually going to put up the wheel, it was not a good joke. The low, sweeping sky, scudding and racing with clouds that looked as angry as capped waves on the sea, threatened bad things. There was nothing in the sky but storm. There wasn't a bird anywhere, not even a sparrow. A rain squall slashed down. The wind hurled the rain into the portal. Will there be any storks left after a storm like this? Dirk asked the group of men around the pile in the schoolyard. The men looked up at the sky and shrugged. Maybe, if the storm doesn't hang on too long, Lena's father said. Maybe a couple of them will have sense enough to go bury their heads in the sand until this blows over. That's ostriches, Lena said, standing right beside him. She was half ashamed of the ignorance of her father. And right before the teacher. Ostriches are supposed to bury their heads in the sand, only they don't. I guess that takes care of you and your ostriches, Elka's father said. Yeah, Lena's father said, nettled. Maybe I'd better go bury my head in some sand. These modern-day school kids, they know everything, don't they? Me, all I know is fish. He grinned suddenly. You kids wouldn't be satisfied with a couple of fish on a roof, he asked plaintively. Say a couple of sharks in a washtub? The children hooted, and he grinned broadly. He sobered, stepped back, and eyed the sharp school roof. Well, come on, all you Solomons, he said impatiently. Let's get on the roof and get that wheel up. The men stood studying the steep roof, wet and steep and windy. It'll be slipperier than a deck full of jellyfish, one of them said, but up with a ladder, and we'll see what the climate is up there. Two men raised the long ladder high and straight. As they carried it upright around the corner of the school, a blast of wind caught the high ladder. The two men struggled, but they couldn't hold it up. The ladder swayed and twisted and threatened to come crashing down. Everybody stood anxiously watching the top of the ladder, expecting it to smash to pieces against the ground at any moment. "Watch it! Watch it!" somebody yelled. "If you can't even set a ladder up, how do you expect to get a wheel up there? Get into it, all of you. Don't stand there staring at the top rung. Let it down. Let it down, I say." "Let it down, I say. There. Now carry it flat around the windy corner. That isn't a flag you're carrying in a parade." It was Giannis. There he came in his wheelchair, forcing it ahead against the wind by sheer strength, and at the same time loudly scolding everybody. The men let the ladder down. Then they turned to face Giannis, a bit peeved at being bawled out before their own children. But Giannis was grinning broadly. He was having a fine time in spite of the wind and the struggle to move against it. He rolled up to the group in his wheelchair. "When it comes to doing anything on land, you guys are about as helpless as fish are," he told them. He turned his chair so as to face the roof. "Now then, let's use our heads. Better yet, I'll use my head."